The stars did not move out here. That was the thing about deep space that nobody really warned you about before your first long deployment. Back on Earth, the sky changed. Clouds moved. The sun rose and set. The moon shifted its face from night to night. But out here, past the edge of charted space, the stars just sat there, cold, still, and endlessly quiet, like they had been sitting there forever and planned to keep doing it long after everything else was gone. Commander Nathan Calloway had been staring at those stars for 11 months. His crew of 41 had not heard him complain once since the Iron Meridian left Earth's orbit and pushed out into the Cygnus expanse on what the mission file politely called a long-range cartographic survey. What that really meant was that the Iron Meridian was out there alone, mapping dark corners of space that no human eye had seen before, marking what was safe, what was not, and what was worth coming back to. It was quiet work, important work, and most days it was very, very boring. Nathan did not mind the boring. He had earned the boring. 3 deployments, 2 wars, 1 incident near the Kepler belt that he did not talk about, and that had taken the hearing in his left ear down by about 30%. The boring was fine. The boring was a gift. He was in the command chair, reviewing a fresh set of star charts, when the boring ended. Lieutenant Brooke Vasquez was the one who found it. She was 29 years old, sharp-eyed, and took her job at the communications station more seriously than most people took anything in their lives. She had been running a passive scan on the long-range receivers, something she did every 4 hours, out of habit, rather than any specific order, when a pattern appeared in the noise. She almost missed it. It was buried deep in a frequency band that no human vessel used, layered under 3 other signal types, and partially corrupted by stellar interference from a nearby pulsar. But Brooke had grown up on the coast of Oregon, listening to her grandfather talk about how the ocean always had something to say if you were quiet enough to hear it. She was quiet enough. She heard it. "Commander," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath the calm that made Nathan look up immediately. "I have something." He crossed the bridge in a few steps and leaned over her station. On the screen, the pattern repeated itself, a steady, looping sequence of pulses and tones that was clearly not natural. Natural signals were random. This was not random. This was structured, deliberate, and cycling with the kind of rhythm that only came from something that had made it on purpose. Something intelligent. "Can you clean it up?" Nathan asked. "Already working on it," Brooke said. It took her 18 minutes. What came through when she was done was not a voice, not a language anyone on the crew could recognize, but a mathematical framework, a structured sequence that the ship's translation AI began parsing almost immediately. The AI was good. It had been built to look for patterns of meaning in unfamiliar signal types, and this one, while completely alien, was not random noise. Whoever had sent this had wanted someone to understand it. The dominant concept that the AI pulled from the signal, rendered into plain English, was this: anyone, help us. Nathan stood very still for a moment. Owen Darby, the navigation specialist, was already at his own station by then, pulled in by the quiet intensity that had settled over the front of the bridge. He was a tall man from Colorado, with big hands and a habit of thinking out loud, and he started triangulating the source signal without being asked. "Got it," he said, after about 4 minutes. "Small system, about 2 light days from our current position, temperate world, breathable atmosphere from what the long-range sensors can tell. Designated K7 Selen on the survey maps. Nobody has been out here to get a close look at it yet." "But somebody lives there," Nathan said. "Yeah," Owen said quietly. "Somebody lives there." Dr. Claire Hooper, the senior science officer, had come onto the bridge by now. She was a careful woman, precise, methodical, the kind of person who read every instruction manual cover to cover before touching anything new. She stood at the edge of the situation and looked at it the way she looked at everything, fully, from all angles, before speaking. "Nathan," she said, using his first name, the way she only did when she was being serious about something. "First contact protocol is very clear. We cannot just go. There is a procedure. There is a committee. There is a diplomatic framework that takes months to arrange properly. If we just point the ship at that planet and go, we are breaking about 14 different standing orders." "I know," Nathan said. "So we should contact Earth Command and wait for instructions." "I know," he said again. Then he looked back at Brooke's screen. The signal was still cycling, still repeating, still saying the same thing over and over, in its looping, desperate pattern. "Please, anyone, help us." Brooke had kept working while the others talked. She was pulling a secondary data packet from the signal now, something attached beneath the main distress sequence, like a file that had been pressed into someone's hand as they ran for the door. When she opened it, and the ship's AI began processing it, the bridge went quiet in a different way. Not the quiet of space, the quiet of people looking at something that made their chest feel tight. It was sensor data, long-range scans, not from the Iron Meridian, from whoever had sent the signal. Whatever civilization lived on K7 Selene had been watching something approach their system for some time, and they had packed everything they knew about it into this signal and thrown it out into the dark, hoping someone would catch it. What they had been watching was a fleet, 30 warships, moving in tight formation, on a direct course for K7 Selene. The AI cross-referenced the ship profiles against every known database on board, and found 3 matches, not to any known species, but to debris fields, ruins. 3 separate star systems within 100 light-years, all of which had once shown signs of civilization on long-range survey scans, and none of which showed any signs of life anymore. The fleet would reach K7 Selene in 11 days. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked back to his chair, sat down, and pulled up the deep band relay, the long-range transmitter that could push a message back to Earth Command, slowly, across the vast distance between the Iron Meridian and home. He typed a message. It was short. He gave the coordinates, the threat data, a 1-sentence summary of what was coming, and a single line at the end that was not a request and was not a question. It read, "We are not waiting." He sent it. Then he looked at Owen. "Plot a course for K7 Selene. Maximum burn. Get us there in 6 days." Owen was already typing. "Aye, Commander." The Iron Meridian turned in the dark and pushed her engines hard, and behind her, the stars stayed exactly where they had always been, still, cold, and watching. The Iron Meridian hit K7 Selene's orbit on the morning of the 6th day, and she hit it hard. 2 of her 4 thrust columns had been running at full power for almost the entire journey. By the time Owen Darby eased her into a stable orbit, both columns were overheating badly enough that the engine room crew had to vent them manually, just to keep the temperature gauges from crossing into the red. The ship groaned in the way that ships groan when they have been pushed past what is comfortable. The crew had felt every hour of it. Nathan had not slept much. He stood at the viewport in the command room and looked down at the planet below, and for a moment he simply let himself look at it. K7 Selene was green and blue, covered in wide shallow seas and thick stretches of forest that went on for what looked like thousands of kilometers. Thin white clouds moved slowly across the surface. From up here, it looked peaceful. It looked like a place where nothing bad had ever happened. He knew that would not be true for much longer. "They know we are here," Brooke said from her station. "I am picking up active scans from the surface. They are looking at us." "Of course they are," Owen said. "We just dropped into their orbit, after burning hard enough to light up half the system. "Are they broadcasting anything?" Nathan asked. Brooke listened for a moment. "Yes, same frequency as the distress signal. The pattern is different now, though. The AI is reading it as—" She paused, checking the translation output. "Uncertainty. Maybe fear. Possibly both." Nathan understood that. A strange ship appearing in your sky without warning, days after you had sent out a desperate cry for help, was not necessarily a comforting sight. He did not know what he looked like to them from down there. He did not know if the Velhari had ever seen a human vessel before. He was willing to bet they had not. He turned to Brooke. "Send back on the same frequency. Keep it simple. Mathematical sequence first, so they know we understood their signal. Then the AI's best attempt at a greeting." Brooke worked at her console for a few minutes. Then she sent it. The reply came back in under 4 minutes. The AI translated it slowly, working through the unfamiliar structure, and what it produced was short and raw and completely unpolished by any kind of diplomatic language. It said, "You received our message. You came. Are you real?" Nathan almost smiled at that. He told Brooke to tell them yes, they were real. They were coming down. The shuttle that carried Nathan and Brooke to the surface was small and fast and not built for ceremony. It landed in the wide central plaza of a city called Onvel, which the surface scans had identified as the largest population center on the planet. The plaza was made of pale stone and surrounded by tall, curved structures that leaned slightly inward at the tops, like trees bending toward light. It was a beautiful city. Nathan noticed that, and then he noticed the fear that was sitting on top of the beauty like a heavy coat. There were hundreds of Velhari gathered at the edges of the plaza, standing very still and watching the shuttle with those large amber eyes. They were tall. Most of them stood close to 2 meters, with thin frames and long fingers and skin that shifted color in slow, quiet waves. Some of them were pale and almost colorless. Some glowed faintly in shades of blue and gray. Nathan did not know yet what the colors meant, but he could feel, even without knowing, that blue and gray were not happy colors. A group of elders came forward as Nathan and Brooke stepped out of the shuttle. At the front of the group was a figure that carried himself with the particular stillness of someone who was used to speaking for other people. His skin was a deep, steady amber color. Nathan's crew had started calling him Amber in their internal communications, because the translator had not yet found a way to render his actual name into any sound a human throat could make. Amber looked at Nathan for a long moment with those wide, unblinking eyes. Then he spoke, and the translator in Nathan's earpiece caught it a few seconds later. "You are very small," Amber said. "We did not expect you to be so small." Brooke made a sound beside Nathan that she quickly turned into a cough. "We get that sometimes," Nathan said. "My name is Nathan Calloway. This is Lieutenant Brooke Vasquez. We are humans from a planet called Earth. We received your signal. We came as fast as we could." His skin shifted from deep amber to something lighter, almost golden. "You came alone," he said. It was not quite an accusation, but it was not an accusation either. "For now," Nathan said, "we have already sent word back to our people. But the fleet coming toward your world arrives in 5 days. We could not wait for more ships before coming to see what we were dealing with. So," he looked at Amber steadily, "tell us everything you know about them, and we will get to work." What followed was 36 hours that Nathan would remember for the rest of his life, though not because anything dramatic happened during them. What happened was work. Hard, fast, focused work, of the kind that Nathan's crew was very good at. Done alongside Velhari, who were frightened but willing, which turned out to be more than enough. Claire Hooper moved through Onvel with a scanning kit and a notebook, studying the city's layout, its buildings, its underground infrastructure, its population numbers. She cataloged everything she saw with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been trained to find useful information in unfamiliar places. The Velhari she encountered watched her with curious eyes, and she gave each of them a small nod as she passed, which she had been told in her cross-cultural training was a reasonable universal gesture of acknowledgement. Whether it meant anything to the Velhari was hard to say, but they seemed to find it less alarming than being ignored. Owen Darby took a surface vehicle, borrowed from the city's transport pool with Amber's permission, and drove it for 16 hours across the terrain surrounding Anvel, mapping every hill, every valley, every stretch of coastline and high ground within 200 kilometers. He came back, sunburned and quiet, and immediately sat down with his maps and started marking things. Kyle Marin, a young engineer from the ship who had volunteered for the ground team, spent most of those 36 hours in a Velhari technical facility alongside a group of their engineers, going through what equipment the planet had available and figuring out what could be adapted, repurposed, or rebuilt under pressure. Kyle was 24 and had a talent for making things work that should not have worked. The Velhari engineers, who had never met a human before, found him confusing, exhausting, and oddly easy to like. Brooke spent 3 full shifts, sleeping for 2 hours in between, working through the complete data packet that the Velhari had compiled on the enemy. She cross-referenced ship profiles, attack patterns, engagement records pulled from the ruins of 3 dead civilizations, and what little the Velhari's own long-range sensors had been able to record before those civilizations went silent. On the second morning, she walked into the operations room where Nathan was standing over Owen's maps and placed a single printed summary on the table in front of him. She looked tired in a way that went past physical. "They have never lost," she said. "Not once. Not even close. Every engagement in their history ends the same way. They move in, they bombard from orbit until resistance collapses, and then they land. And the reason they always win is not because they are so powerful." She paused. "It is because no one has ever actually fought back." Nathan looked at the summary. Then he picked up the deep band relay handset and opened a channel to Earth Command, because the message he had sent 6 days ago had not been enough. He needed to make something very clear to the people back home. He needed to tell them that this was not a diplomatic situation. Outside, the sky above Anvel was still clear and blue and peaceful, and 5 days away, 30 warships were moving through the dark toward it without slowing down. On the 7th day, the sky above K7 Selene changed. It did not change slowly. It did not give any warning. One moment, the sky was clear and blue, the way it had been every morning since Nathan and his crew had landed. And then the long-range sensors on the Iron Meridian started screaming, and Brooke's voice came through Nathan's earpiece, sharp and fast and wide awake, even though she had been asleep 20 minutes ago. "They are coming out of FTL," she said, "but it is not the Vorkai. Nathan, it is ours." Nathan stepped out of the operations building into the open plaza and looked up. He could not see anything yet with his eyes, but he knew what was up there. He had sent the message. He had given the coordinates and the threat data and the 5 words at the end that were not a request. And Earth Command, to their considerable credit, had not sent a committee. They had not sent a diplomat in a clean uniform carrying a briefcase full of carefully worded language. They had sent Admiral Dana Forsyth. 14 vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel in high orbit, one after another, and even from the surface, the Velhari who were watching the sky from windows and rooftops and open doorways could feel something had changed. The Iron Meridian sensors were broadcasting the fleet's profile down to Nathan's tablet in real time. He read through the list slowly. A heavy carrier at the center, the Adamantine. 3 destroyers arranged in a protective formation around her. 4 gunships running a wide patrol spread. 4 rapid assault frigates tucked in close and ready to move fast. And at the edge of the formation, running dark and quiet, a single vessel designated the Grave Silence, which was listed in the fleet manifest as an electronic warfare ship, and which Nathan suspected was considerably more dangerous than that description made it sound. 14 ships, not 30, not even close to the Vorkai's numbers. But Nathan had seen what human warships could do when they were crewed by people who knew what they were doing. And these ships had not been sent out here by accident. Someone back home had read his message and understood what kind of situation this was. His skin was shifting between colors that the translator was still learning. A slow cycle that Nathan had come to understand meant the elder was thinking hard about something and had not yet decided how to feel about it. "More of your kind," Amber said. "Yes," Nathan said. "How many people are on those ships?" Nathan did some quick math in his head. Somewhere around 4,000, give or take. Amber looked up at the sky for a long moment. "And the enemy brings 30 ships," he said quietly. "Your people looked at those numbers and still came." "Yes," Nathan said again. Amber did not say anything after that, but his skin settled into a steady, deep gold, which by now Nathan had learned was the Velhari color for something that did not translate perfectly, but sat somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. Admiral Dana Forsyth made contact within 10 minutes of arrival. Her voice, on the comm channel, was exactly what Nathan had expected from someone with her record. Level, direct, with no wasted words, and no performance of authority. She did not need to perform it. It came off her naturally, the way heat comes off stone that has been sitting in the sun all day. "Commander Calloway," she said, "brief me." Nathan briefed her, all of it. The Velhari, the planet, the 30 Vorkai ships, the 11 days of travel data Brooke had spent 3 shifts pulling apart, the fact that the enemy had never once faced real resistance in their entire recorded history of conquest. He talked for about 12 minutes, without stopping. Forsyth listened without interrupting once, which Nathan had been told was one of her more notable qualities. When he finished, there was a silence of exactly 3 seconds. "Here is what we are going to do." What followed was 72 hours that the Velhari would talk about for generations. Not because of anything that exploded or anyone who got hurt. What they would talk about was the pace of it. The absolute relentless human pace of preparation, which operated on a frequency that the Velhari, as a people, had simply never encountered before. The Velhari were not a slow civilization. They were thoughtful, methodical, and careful, and those were good qualities. But humans preparing for a fight moved at a speed that left thoughtful and methodical somewhere far behind, and went straight to something rawer and louder, and considerably harder to keep up with. Forsyth came to the surface herself on the first day, which surprised everyone, including Nathan. She walked through Onvel with him and Owen for 3 hours, looking at everything, asking short, precise questions, and making notes on a small device she carried in her jacket pocket. She stood on the high ridge north of the city and looked out at the landscape Owen had mapped, and was quiet for a long time. "Good ground," she said finally. "I thought so too," Owen said. "You did well getting all this before we arrived," she told Nathan, and then she moved on before he could respond, which was also, he suspected, one of her qualities. The orbital relay stations were the first major project. There were 3 of them, positioned around K7 Selen at equal intervals, built by the Velhari to manage communications between their planet and the small number of satellites they had managed to put into orbit over the past century. Kyle Marin looked at them and immediately saw something the Velhari engineers had not considered. With the right modifications, those relay stations could be converted into signal jamming arrays, broadcasting on the exact frequencies the Vorkai used to control their automated drone weapons. It would not take down the Vorkai fleet, but it would take down a significant part of what the Vorkai fleet sent ahead of itself. which was a meaningful thing to be able to do. Kyle explained this to Forsyth in about 4 sentences. She told him to do it. He was already moving before she finished speaking. Gabby Torres, the ship's communications officer, worked alongside Kyle and a team of 6 Velhari engineers to carry out the modifications. Gabby was from New Mexico, spoke 3 languages, and had a gift for explaining complicated technical ideas in ways that non-technical people could follow, which turned out to be exactly the skill needed when working with engineers who had never seen human technology before. She drew diagrams. She demonstrated things hands-on. She made mistakes and fixed them out loud, so the Velhari engineers could see the process, not just the result. One of those engineers was an older Velhari male who worked with a quiet concentration that Kyle respected immediately. They had no name for him that the translator could manage, so Kyle called him Amber 2, after the Elder, because he had the same steady golden color when he was focused on a problem. Amber 2 did not sleep for the first 40 hours of the project. Neither did Kyle. By the end of it, they had stopped needing the translator for most of the technical work, communicating instead through diagrams and pointed fingers and the particular look that people share when they both understand what a circuit is supposed to do. On the 4th day, the Vorkai arrived at the edge of the system. Their opening message came through on a wide broadcast frequency, and the translation AI handled it quickly because the structure was simple. It was not a question. It was the same message they sent every time, to every civilization they had ever moved against. A flat, cold statement that said, "Your leadership will step down. Your population will await processing. Your resistance will accomplish nothing." They had sent that message 47 times. It had worked 47 times. Forsyth listened to the translation from the bridge of the Adamantine. Then she opened a channel on the same frequency and spoke 4 sentences. She told the Vorkai they had entered protected space. She told them to withdraw. She told them that if they did not withdraw, the consequences would be entirely their own fault. And then she waited. They responded the only way they knew how to respond, the only way they had ever needed to respond in 47 engagements across 100 years of conquest. They advanced. On the surface of K7 Selen, in the operations room in Anvel, Nathan watched the Vorkai formation moving on his display, and felt something settle in his chest. Not fear, not exactly. Something quieter than fear. The kind of feeling that comes when the waiting is finally over, and the thing that is going to happen is now simply happening. He picked up his comm unit and checked in with his ground team. "Everyone ready?" he said. One by one, they answered yes. Outside, the sky was still and clear and full of stars, and somewhere up in that darkness, 4,000 humans were getting to work. The Battle of K7 Selen began not with an explosion, but with silence. It was the kind of silence that comes right before something very loud, the kind that presses against your ears and makes the air feel heavier than it should. On the bridge of the Adamantine, Admiral Dana Forsyth sat in her command chair and watched the Vorkai formation move across her display screen like a slow, dark tide rolling in from the edge of the system. 30 ships, moving in their standard formation, flagship at the center, escort destroyers fanned out on either side, drone platforms pushed forward like a wide-open hand reaching ahead of the rest. They moved with the confidence of something that had never been stopped. Forsyth let them come. She had positioned her fleet carefully over the past 3 days. The Adamantine and their 3 destroyers sat in high orbit, visible, exactly where the Vorkai would expect the main resistance to be. The 4 gunships were spread wide to the flanks, far enough apart that the Vorkai would have to split their attention to track all of them. And the 4 rapid assault frigates were somewhere the Vorkai could not see at all, tucked low behind the curve of the planet on its dark side, engines cold and quiet, waiting. The grave silence was waiting too, but in a different way. The Vorkai sent their drone platforms forward, first. That was always their opening move. 112 combat drones, each one the size of a small vehicle, spread out in a wide dispersal pattern, designed to overwhelm point defense systems through sheer numbers. They had done this 47 times. The defending side always tried to shoot the drones down one by one. Always ran out of point defense capacity before they ran out of drones. And by the time the main fleet engaged, the defenders were already stretched thin and starting to break. Forsyth had read about this in Brooks' threat summary. She had read it 3 times. She had thought about it for a long time. And then she had talked to the crew of the Grave Silence and asked them a very specific question about the Vorkai drone control frequencies that Owen Darby had spent 3 days pulling from the captured sensor data. The Grave Silence fired first. It did not fire weapons. It fired signal, a precisely shaped electromagnetic pulse, tuned to exactly the frequency the Vorkai used to send instructions to their drones. The pulse went out like a wave and hit all 112 drones at the same moment. Every single one of them went dark. They did not explode. They did not veer off course. They simply stopped, floating inert in space like 112 pieces of very expensive debris, completely useless in the first 4 minutes of the engagement. On the Vorkai flagship, there was a moment of total confusion. In 47 engagements, their drones had never stopped working. The Grand Executive, the commander of the Vorkai fleet, a being that Forsyth's crew had already started calling the Grand Nothing in their internal comms, had no immediate answer for what had just happened. That 4-minute confusion cost him more than he realized, because while he was trying to understand it, the destroyers opened fire. The main engagement in high orbit was not clean or quick. The Vorkai escort destroyers were large vessels, heavily armored, and they hit hard when they landed shots. The Adamantine took 3 direct impacts in the first hour that shook her hard enough to knock crew off their feet on the lower decks. A fire started in the secondary engine corridor and took 11 minutes to put out. Forsyth received a damage report every 4 minutes and acknowledged each one without taking her eyes off the tactical display. What the Vorkai had not prepared for was how the human fleet fought as a single connected thing. When one destroyer drew fire and pulled back slightly, another moved into the gap and hit the same target from a different angle before the Vorkai could redirect. When the Vorkai tried to concentrate fire on the Adamantine, the gunships on the flanks pushed in hard enough to force attention back to them. The Vorkai formation was built around the idea that an enemy would hold a defensive line and try to survive. The human fleet did not hold a line. It moved constantly, fluidly, like it was having a conversation with itself at very high speed. In mid-orbit, the 4 gunships chased the Vorkai flanking squadrons across 200,000 kilometers of space and refused to let go. One of those gunships, a vessel called the Colby Ridge, took a direct hit to her starboard weapons cluster at the 3rd hour of the battle. The explosion tore through 2 compartments and killed 3 of her crew instantly. The captain of the Colby Ridge, a woman named Lieutenant Commander Paula Reeves, lost the hearing in her right ear from the pressure wave, and did not notice for 40 minutes because she was too busy rerouting power from every non-essential system on the ship to keep her remaining weapons operational. The Colby Ridge stayed in the fight. The Vorkai had no category for this. In their experience, a damaged ship pulled back. A damaged ship signaled retreat and waited for the engagement to end. A ship that took the kind of hit the Colby Ridge took was supposed to be finished. The fact that it was not finished, that it kept coming, kept firing, kept pushing, introduced something into the Vorkai tactical situation that their commanders had no word for, because they had never needed a word for it before. On the surface of K7 Selene, Nathan watched the orbital battle on the sensor display in the operations room. The data came through in numbers and icons and trajectory lines, and it told the story in a cold, technical language that was somehow harder to read than a direct view would have been. Amber stood beside him for most of the 7th and 8th hours, watching the same display, his bioluminescence barely moving, his wide amber eyes tracking each icon on the screen with an intensity that needed no translation. The turning point came at the 7th hour, and it happened fast. The Vorkai Grand Executor, having failed to break the human defensive line after 6 hours of sustained engagement, made a decision that was bold and logical and wrong. He pulled his flagship and 4 escort ships out of the main formation and pushed them directly at the adamantine in a tight, concentrated formation. 5 heavy ships, moving together with enough combined firepower to overwhelm the carrier's shields at close range. It was the kind of move that ended battles quickly. It had ended battles quickly before. Forsyth had anticipated it on the 2nd day of planning. She had written it in her notebook, with a short note underneath that read, "If they do this, respond with the frigates." The 4 rapid assault frigates that had been sitting cold and quiet on the planet's dark side lit their engines and came around in a long curving burn, using the planet's own gravity to sling themselves fast and low and hit the Vorkai push formation from the flank and the rear at the same moment. It happened in under 3 minutes from the time the Vorkai flagship began its advance. The Grand Executor's ship lost its engine cluster in the first exchange and began to drift. 2 escort ships were destroyed outright. The other 2 broke formation, and in Vorkai combat doctrine, a broken formation meant only one thing: retreat. It spread through the Vorkai fleet the way fire spreads through dry grass, fast and then faster. Ship by ship, the formation began to pull back. The confidence that had carried them across 100 years of unopposed conquest could not survive what had just happened to it. They had been countered. They had been flanked. They had been outfought by an enemy they had never heard of, from a planet they could not have found on a map 3 weeks ago. By the 9th hour, 14 Vorkai ships were gone, and the remaining 16 were in full FTL withdrawal, their jump vectors already being tracked and recorded by the grave silence for Earth Command's files. The bridge of the adamantine was very quiet when the last Vorkai ship disappeared from the display. Someone started a slow round of applause that moved through the deck in a tired, honest wave. Forsyth let it run for about 10 seconds. Then she picked up her comm unit and asked for damage reports, because the battle was over, but the work was not, and she was not a person who sat with a moment longer than a moment deserved. Down on the surface, in the operations room in Onvel, Nathan let out a long, slow breath that he felt like he had been holding for 4 days. Amber placed a hand, carefully, gently, on Nathan's shoulder. It was a small gesture, and it was not practiced or formal. It was just one person reaching out to another person when words were too slow to say what needed to be said. Nathan put his hand over Amber's and nodded once. Outside the window, the sky above K7 Selene was clear and still and full of stars, and for the first time in 11 days, nothing in those stars was moving toward them. 3 weeks after the battle, K7 Selene was quiet again. Not the quiet of fear, which was the only quiet the planet had known for a long time before the Iron Meridian appeared in its sky. This was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes after something terrible has passed, and the people who lived through it are still standing, still breathing, still looking at each other with the slightly stunned expression of those who expected the worst and did not get it. The human fleet remained in orbit, moving slowly and steadily above the planet, while repair crews worked around the clock on the ships that had taken damage in the battle. The adamantine had the worst of it: 3 deep hull impacts, a destroyed weapons station, and a fire-damaged engine corridor that would need proper dock repairs back at a human station before she was fully herself again. The Colby Ridge was being held together with what her chief engineer privately described as determination and good intentions. And even that was probably generous. But she was still there, still flying, still whole enough to count. On the surface, the city of Anvel had slowly come back to life. Velhari civilians who had sheltered underground during the battle came up blinking into the daylight and stood in the streets of their city and looked at the sky that was still theirs. Some of them wept, some of them simply stood and breathed the open air for a long time without moving, the way people do when they have been underground long enough to forget how wide the sky actually is. Nathan watched them from the steps of the operations building and thought about things he did not have words for yet. The formal meeting between Admiral Forsyth and the Velhari Council was held on the 14th day after the battle. It was a large, open room with a high curved ceiling and walls made of the same pale stone as the plaza outside. Light came in through long, narrow windows and lay in clean, flat lines across the floor. It was a room built for important conversations, and it had clearly hosted many of them over the 4,000 years of Velhari civilization. Forsyth arrived without ceremony. She walked in with Nathan, Brooke, Claire Hooper, Kyle Marin, and Gabby Torres, and she sat down across the long table from Amber and 8 other council elders, with the same direct, settled manner she brought to everything. The Velhari Council had apparently not expected her to come in person. A commander of her rank sending delegates was the expected thing. Coming herself was not. Amber's skin shifted through a brief warm gold when she sat down, which Nathan had learned by now was the Velhari color of respect, given without reservation. The meeting began with the formal things, the exchange of names, the recording of the date, the careful language of 2 civilizations meeting properly for the first time under conditions that neither of them had planned for. Then Amber set the formal language aside and asked the question that every Velhari in the city and probably every Velhari on the planet had been quietly carrying since the day the Iron Meridian first appeared in their sky. "Why did you come?" he said. "You owed us nothing. You did not know us. The cost to you was very great. People from your fleet did not come home, and still you came. We need to understand why." The room was very still. Forsyth looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Brooke. Brooke looked at Kyle, who shrugged in the way he always shrugged when something felt so obvious to him that he could not find the starting point for explaining it. Forsyth turned back to Amber and answered for all of them. "Because you asked," she said simply, "and we were close enough to help. That is generally how humans decide these things." Amber held her gaze for a long moment. His skin moved through deep blue and settled back to gold. He reached below the table and placed an object in front of Forsyth, a flat, smooth disk of carved stone, no bigger than her hand, with a pattern etched carefully into its surface. The translator identified the pattern as the Velhari symbol for the word witnessed, which in their language carried a deeper meaning than the simple English word suggested. It meant that one person had seen another person truly, without pretense, at the moment that mattered most. Forsyth looked at the disk for a moment. Then she picked it up and held it carefully. Amber began to speak, and he spoke slowly, and the translator kept up with him in Nathan's earpiece without difficulty, because Amber was choosing his words with great care. He said that in 4,000 years of Velhari history, his people had always believed they were alone in the part of the galaxy that mattered. That the silence of space had told them, again and again, that civilizations advanced enough to cross the stars were also advanced enough to be cruel. That the strong consumed the small, and that no one came when you called. That the Vorkai had simply been the final proof of something the Velhari had long suspected was true. He said the humans had broken that belief, not with a speech, not with a treaty, not with any kind of formal promise, simply by showing up. Forsyth was quiet for a moment when he finished. This was notable, because people who knew her well would say she was rarely quiet. Then she said, "The Vorkai will go somewhere else eventually. They lost too much here to come back for you. But they will find another young civilization, and they will do the same thing they always do. And when we find out where, we will go there too." She paused and looked at Amber steadily. "If your people ever want to stand beside us when that happens, that offer will always be open." Amber's skin went very still and very gold. The formal part of the meeting ended not long after that, and people drifted out of the great hall in small groups, talking in the careful and slightly awkward way of people who have just shared something significant and are not entirely sure what to do with the feeling of it. Kyle Marin did not go back to the ship. He sat down on the low stone wall at the edge of the plaza outside and watched the sun move toward the horizon. And after a while, Amber too came and sat beside him. They had spent so many hours working alongside each other over the past 3 weeks that sitting in silence together did not feel strange. It felt like the natural continuation of a conversation that had mostly happened through shared work and pointed fingers and the particular satisfaction of a circuit that finally did what it was supposed to do. Amber too pulled out a small display device and turned it toward Kyle. On the screen were schematics, new ones, drawn in the precise and careful style of Velhari engineering, but incorporating design elements that were unmistakably influenced by the work the two of them had done together on the relay station modifications. The Velhari engineering teams had already begun applying what they had learned to a full redesign of their orbital defense platforms. They had not waited to be told to do it. They had simply started. Kyle looked at the schematics for a long time. Then he looked at Amber too, with a wide, genuine grin. "You were paying attention," he said. The translator produced the closest equivalent in Velhari, and Amber too's skin glowed a quiet and steady amber. He said something that came through the translation as, "It was not hard to pay attention. Your kind make it very clear how important a thing is by how fast you move toward it." Kyle leaned back on the wall and looked up at the early evening sky. The Adamantine and her fleet were visible up there as slow-moving lights, steady and bright against the first stars coming out. He thought about the 11 days of hard burning it had taken to get here. He thought about the 3 names he had learned after the battle, the 3 crew members of the Colby Ridge who had not made it. He thought about Brooks' voice in the comm bay that first night, cutting through the static, saying, "You received our message. You came. Are you real?" He thought about how Amber had asked that question, like a person asking something they already expected the answer to be no. "Yeah," Kyle said softly, more to himself than to anyone. "I guess we do." The sun finished setting over Onvel. The city lit up slowly from within, warm light filling the windows of the curved buildings, and the streets filled with quiet sounds again. Voices, movement, the ordinary sounds of a civilization going about its evening, in the calm knowledge that it still had evenings to go about. Inside the Iron Meridian, still in orbit above it all, Brooke Vasquez sat alone in the communications bay. It was late, and the ship was mostly quiet around her. She pulled up the original distress signal on the archive, the one she had found buried in the noise 11 days and what felt like a lifetime ago, and she let it play through her headset one more time. The mathematical structure that someone had built with great care and launched into the dark, not knowing if anyone was out there to hear it. She listened to the whole thing. Then she opened a new folder in the ship's archive and moved the file into it. She named the folder with a single word, typed it in lowercase, and saved it. The word was answered. She closed the panel, turned off the light, and went to get some sleep.